Hello and welcome. You are listening to Pint Size Therapy, where we explore all things related to mental health healing, personal growth and development, emotional wellness, and the human experience in pint-sized bites. I am your host, Dr. Aletha Clark, a licensed psychotherapist, certified hypnotherapist, and master addiction counselor, and I am happy to have you here with me today as you embark on your mental wellness journey. While I appreciate you tuning in, don't forget this podcast is informational only and is not a substitute for seeking out your own mental health counseling with a licensed professional. So join me as we jump into today's episode. Hello and welcome back. In our last episode, we discussed life transitions and the cycle of renewal. We focused on the various seasons we find ourselves in and how we deal with those transitions. I thought in today's episode, we should focus on a feeling we may experience during a season of change, and that is the feeling of loss of control. Today's episode is titled Controlling the Controllable. While the feeling of loss of control can come up for us in periods of transition, the need for control can show up in many more ways. That is why today we are going to dive into understanding our deep human need to feel in control, why we lose control, why sometimes losing control feels so unsettling, and most importantly, how to focus our energy on what we can influence while learning to release the rest. So let's get into this. Control can show up in so many ways. For some people, it looks like micromanaging. Every detail of their day, color-coded planners, to-do lists, double-checking everything twice, needing everything in the house to be just so. For others, it's more subtle, a little bit less visible, being the fixer in the relationship, rehearsing conversations in advance, obsessing over how others see us, or feeling restless and anxious when plans are uncertain. It might also show up in emotional ways. For example, maybe you feel the need to present yourself in a certain way, always careful with your words, because the thought of being misunderstood feels unbearable. So let's take Maria, for example. She could be a 35-year-old professional, and Maria plans every detail of her day. She worries about her partner's moods and tries to smooth over conflict in her family before it even begins. She believes if she just manages everything perfectly, nothing will fall apart. But Maria ends most days exhausted, tense, and still replaying everything in her head. For her, control feels like safety, but it's also a prison. When we live like Maria, we think control equals protection, but it actually breeds stress, overthinking, and constant vigilance. It's like keeping every muscle in your body flexed all day. You may look composed on the outside, but internally you're worn thin. So why do we strive to be in control? The short answer, it's human nature. But at its core, control makes us feel safe and certain. Our brains are wired for predictability because unpredictability once meant danger. Think about our ancestors. Knowing when the seasons would change or where food would come from was literally the difference between survival and danger. That instinct has carried into modern life. While we're not hunting and gathering anymore, our brains still crave that sense of stability. On a psychological level, control can also serve as a buffer against anxiety. If I can manage every detail, I won't have to face the discomfort of uncertainty. If I can just steer the wheel in every situation, I won't be caught off guard. But here's the modern problem. Life is messy and it's unpredictable. The illusion of control keeps us spinning. When we believe we should be able to prevent every mistake, protect everyone that we love, and plan for every outcome, we set ourselves up for endless disappointment. This constant striving creates anxiety, irritability, and an inability to relax. You may find yourself checking emails late into the night or trying to anticipate problems days in advance. It feels productive, but really it's draining. And the more you try to control, the more life reminds you that you just can't. And you might wonder, well, what exactly leads us to want to control? And there's several factors that influence how strongly we cling to control. Our upbringing has a lot to do with it. If you grew up in a chaotic or unpredictable environment, you may have learned that the only way to feel safe was to tightly control your surroundings. You may have learned control equals survival. And also past trauma. When people experience trauma, loss, betrayal, and instability, the need for control often intensifies as a way to prevent future pain. To not place ourselves in vulnerable positions, control becomes a protective factor for us. But sometimes it's just our personality or our temperament. Some of us are just natural planners or perfectionists. Others may be more easygoing about it, but some lean toward perfectionism, which fuels control and can lead to anxiety. And let's also talk about social pressures. Our culture often rewards control. Think about phrases like, take control of your destiny, or be the master of your fate. Phrases like these often glorify the idea that you should be in control at all times. And the roots can create a lifelong pattern of hypervigilance, constantly scanning for threats, over preparing, and overthinking. It might initially feel protective, but it leaves you restless and exhausted, and sometimes even resentful when others don't actually cooperate with your attempts to manage everything. It's like gripping the steering wheel of a car. For some, holding it loosely, being relaxed is enough. You trust the road and you trust your skills. But for others, the grip is so tight that your knuckles turn white. But the grip doesn't actually make the road safer. It just makes your arms ache. So when life throws us into situations we can't manage, like an unexpected illness, a job loss, or someone else's choices, it can stir up a whirlwind of emotions. You get into an endless cycle of what ifs. You get frustrated. Why can't this just go the way I want? You feel helpless. No matter what I do, it doesn't matter. And the discomfort of not knowing what's next feels fearful and frightening. Sometimes losing control can even feel like a personal failure, as if we're not strong enough or disciplined enough. Living in that headspace steals joy and presence. You can't enjoy today if you're stuck rehearsing tomorrow. It can also trigger physical symptoms, tight shoulders, headaches, stomach issues, because your nervous system is in constant overdrive. So what does it mean to control the controllable? This is where the shift begins. Controlling the controllable doesn't mean you magically take charge of everything. It just means that you start to recognize what is within your influence and what isn't, and then directing your energy accordingly. It means being wise about where you place your energy. And let's look at this and what this means in practical terms. You can't control the weather, but you can carry an umbrella. You can't control whether your coworker shows up grumpy, but you can control how you respond. You can't control every twist in life, but you can control your mindset, your preparation, and your choices. It's about loosening that tight grip on the steering wheel and focusing on the lane you're actually driving in, not the traffic 5 miles ahead. So if you don't learn to distinguish between what's in your power and what's not, you'll waste energy trying to stop the rain instead of grabbing the umbrella. So what exactly can we control? So you can control your thoughts and your mindset, your emotions, your words, and your reactions. We can control how we treat other people, how we care for our body and our mind. We have control over the effort that we put into our goals, the boundaries that we set. We also have control over the meaning we make out of situations and our intentions and our attitudes. But what we can't control the past. We can't control the people's choices, thoughts, feelings, or reactions. External circumstances like the economy, weather, or world events are not in our control. The outcome of every situation. And we can't control others' past and present behaviors. Ultimately, when we spend our time trying to control the uncontrollable, other people, the past, the what ifs, we rob ourselves of the chance to grow in the areas we can influence. So right now, I invite you to take a moment and reflect on this. Reflect on the controllable versus the uncontrollable. Take a moment to list on paper or in your mind something you're currently struggling with. Then I encourage you to make 2 columns under that. On the left, write what parts of it are within your control. On the right, list what isn't. And then reflect. Reflect on the energy you are wasting focusing on the things you cannot control. And begin to shift your mindset to refocus on the things that you can. Just seeing this in black and white or visualizing it can be freeing. So when we stop wasting energy on what's out of our hands, we reclaim energy for what matters most. But to really understand the benefit, we need to look at the cost of not making that shift, of living in a constant state of trying to control everything. When you're always trying to manage the uncontrollable, your body stays in a state of flight or fight, stress and burnout. The constant stress response leads to fatigue and irritability, trouble sleeping. It's like running a marathon without ever crossing the finish line. You try to anticipate every possible outcome often, but that backfires. Instead of helping us, it traps us in endless cycles of what if thinking. You replay conversations in your head. You plan scenarios that may never happen. And you get stuck instead of moving forward. And you waste time and energy. The truth is, control can be an illusion. And I want you to think about that as I say it again. The truth is, control can be an illusion. We pour our time into managing our people's emotions, double checking every detail, worrying about future events that may not unfold the way we expect. All that energy could have been directed toward things we can influence, things that we can control, our self-care, our goals, our meaningful relationships. And ultimately, speaking about relationships, when we try to control others, whether it's a partner, a child, a friend, or a coworker, it often creates tension and distance. People start to feel suffocated or resentful. The relationship dynamic can shift into conflict instead of connection. Furthermore, trying to overly control your children can result in anxious and rebellious children. So living in a constant state of control can rob us of the present moment. Instead of enjoying dinner with a friend, you're mentally calculating tomorrow's meeting. Instead of savoring a quiet morning, you're scrolling the news for potential threats. I want you to imagine holding a balloon in your hand and squeezing it tightly. The harder you squeeze, the more it bulges and threatens to burst. That's what happens when we cling to control. The very effort to contain everything creates pressure until it feels overwhelming, until it finally bursts. But what's the benefit of letting go? By recognizing the difference between what you can and can't control, we release ourselves from this endless cycle. The benefits are profound. We lower our stress and anxiety. We begin to have greater clarity and focus. We learn to have more balanced relationships, and we embrace a deeper sense of peace and presence. I'd like to talk about some strategies to let go of what you can't control. We can engage in things such as mindfulness and acceptance. Practice being present. Notice when your mind starts spiraling into what ifs. Remind yourself, this is out of my control. This strategy often reminds me of the serenity prayer. Being granted the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. When we substitute the word change for control, the impact of accepting and shifting our mindset can be profound. We begin to have the serenity to accept the things that we cannot control, the courage to change the things or control the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Another strategy is shifting your language. Instead of saying, I have to control this, say, I will influence what I can and let go of what I can't. Language shifts mindset. And what about boundaries? If you're trying to control others, consider where you can set boundaries instead. For example, I can't control how you react, but I can choose not to engage in this argument right now. Some people actually find it helpful to symbolically release the control. For example, writing down a worry on paper and then tearing it up or shred it, or placing it in a jar labeled, not mine to control. And finally, one of the things you can do is focusing on your values. When you can't control the outcome, focus on living according to your values. Asking yourself, what kind of person do I want to be in this moment? Without practices like these, the cycle of stress, overthinking, and wasted energy continues to be unchecked. But with them, you slowly shift from clenched fists to open hands. Think of this like carrying a backpack. If you fill it with rocks that don't belong to you, other people's choices, others' responses, world events, you'll be weighed down. But if you take out what isn't yours, you suddenly find yourself lighter, able to move forward with energy. So, as we wrap up today's episode, I want you to pause and take a breath. Think about one area of your life right now where you've been holding on too tightly, where your knuckles have been white on that steering wheel. Ask yourself, what parts of this are truly mine to influence? What parts do I need to release? Maybe your first step today is as simple as shifting your focus, letting go of one worry you can't fix. Maybe it's focusing instead on how you want to show up right here, right now. Remember, peace comes not from controlling everything, but from choosing wisely where to place your energy, recognizing what is in our control. So, I thank you for joining me for today's episode. And if you found this episode meaningful, take a moment today. Write down one thing you're letting go of and one thing you're choosing to focus on. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. Focus on what's within your reach and keep practicing the art of controlling the controllable. As always, thank you for joining me today on Pint-Sized Therapy. If you found this conversation meaningful, I invite you to leave me a comment, like, subscribe, and share with your family and friends. Come visit my website at pintsizedtherapy.com and my Etsy shop at pintsizedtherapy.etsy.com, where you will find resources to accompany our various discussions and encourage you to continue your wellness journey. Once again, I am Dr. Aletha Clark. Until next time, remember to protect your peace and take care of your mental health.